Previous session we have came to know about the concept of deforestation, and also we learned about what are the consequences of deforestation. We came to know the consequences of deforestation like floods, droughts, soil erosion, desertification, and natural imbalance. So now today in this session we are going to discuss about the conservation of forest and wildlife, as to avoid the consequences of deforestation and the effects of deforestation, we must need to conserve the forest and wildlife, isn't it? So hence, to conserve the forest and wildlife is nothing but the wild animals which survive in the forest. We need to protect both forest and wildlife. As the name, forest, it will include the plants, and wildlife is nothing but the animals that will be present in the forest. So if we want to avoid the consequences, bad effects of deforestation, then we must need to conserve the forest and wildlife. And while going through the explanation of this conservation of forest and wildlife, you will come across these terms. There is wildlife sanctuary, national park, biosphere reserve, flora and fauna. So understand the terminology and meaning of these terms and make a note of this term also. So we will discuss about the how we can conserve the forest and wildlife through these graphical slides. Okay, have a look at these graphical slides and note down the important things that will be highlighted.
So before we enter in the next topic, let's study about a few terms such as ecosystem. Ecosystem is a community of living and non-living organisms interacting with each other in a specific physical environment. In simple words, we can define ecosystem as a complete unit consisting of two main components: abiotic components, that is the non-living components such as climate, temperature, humidity, soil, water, air, etc., and biotic components. There are a set of living organisms such as animals, plants, or microorganisms that are in constant interaction with each other. So we can define ecosystem as a community of living and non-living things that interact with each other. Example, aquatic ecosystem. It is a body of water. It is a community of living organisms that are dependent on each other in a body of water. The desert ecosystem, forest ecosystem. So next term is biodiversity. Before that, let's see what is a biosphere. A biosphere is a part of the earth. It's also called as ecosphere, and it's a sum of all the ecosystems. That is, it is a part of the earth in which the living organisms exist or which supports life. Now, biodiversity, it refers to the variety of organisms existing on the earth, their interrelationships and their relationships with the environment. That is, biodiversity is the variety and variability of life on earth. It's the amount of diversity between different plants and animals and other species in a given habitat at a particular time. For example, the different varieties of animals and plants that live in an ocean is an example of ocean biodiversity. So we saw what is deforestation and what are the consequences of deforestation. So now we know how forest is important. So we have to conserve them. So in order to protect the flora and fauna and the habitats, the government have established certain protected areas called as wildlife sanctuaries, national parks and biosphere reserves. And the government have laid down rules, methods and policies to protect the wildlife and conserve them. Plantation, cultivation, grazing, cutting of trees, hunting and poaching are prohibited in these areas. So in the previous slide, I mentioned about flora and fauna. So what do you mean by flora and fauna? The plants and animals found in a particular area are termed as flora and fauna of that area respectively. That is, the plants found in a particular area are termed as flora and the animals found in a particular area are termed as fauna of that area. Now let's see an example. This is a Pachmarhi Biosphere Reserve, and the plants found in Pachamarhi Biosphere Reserve are sal, teak, mango, jamun, silver ferns, arjun, etc. And the fauna are blue bull, barking deer, cheetah, leopard, wild dog, leopards, etc. So in order to protect the flora and fauna of a particular area, the government have established certain protected areas such as biosphere reserves, wildlife sanctuaries and national parks. So let's discuss each of these protected areas in detail. So the first one is biosphere reserve. The biosphere reserve are the areas meant for the conservation of biodiversity. What do you mean by biodiversity? It is a variety of plants and animals living in a given habitat. So we can define biosphere reserve as the large areas of protected land for the conservation of wildlife, plant and animal resources and the traditional life of the tribals living in that area. So this is an example of a biosphere reserve. This is a Pachamarhi Biosphere Reserve, and the Biosphere Reserve may also contain other protected areas in it. So this Pachamarhi Biosphere Reserve, it consists of one national park named as Satpura and two wildlife sanctuaries named Bori and Pachamarhi. So a Biosphere Reserve is a protected area meant for the conservation of biodiversity, and it contains other protected areas as well. So now let's see what is a wildlife sanctuary. Wildlife sanctuaries like reserve forest provide protection and suitable living conditions to wild animals. That is, wildlife sanctuaries are the areas where wildlife is protected. And the people living in wildlife sanctuaries are allowed to do certain activities such as grazing by their livestock, collecting medicinal plants, firewood, etc. But hunting and poaching are strictly prohibited in these areas. Some of the threatened wild animals like blackbuck, elephant, python, rhinoceros are protected and preserved in our wildlife sanctuaries. Now, example of wildlife sanctuary is the Bhadra Wildlife Sanctuary, which is situated in Karnataka, and Gir National Park and Wildlife Sanctuary, which is situated in Gujarat. So now let's see what is national parks. National parks are the areas reserved for wildlife where they can freely use the habitats and natural resources. That is, the national parks, they not only protect the wildlife but also the whole set of ecosystems. That is the flora, fauna, landscape and even historic objects in that area. That is, in wildlife sanctuary, they protect only wildlife, whereas in national parks, they protect wildlife along with the ecosystem. Example of a national park is the Satpura National Park. It is the first reserve forest of India. The finest Indian teak is also found in the forest, and we can also find rock shelters in that national park. And there are more than 100 national parks in India. Human activities such as grazing, poaching, hunting, capturing of animals, collection of firewood, medicinal plants are not allowed in national parks.
Hope you have understood the concept of conserving the forest and wildlife, and also the terminology of these terms, the differences between wildlife sanctuary, national park, biosphere reserve, and the difference between flora and fauna. So today we shall end up our session here, and the further content we shall continue in the next class. Don't forget to watch the videos on the prescribed timetable. Complete your work as the prescribed timetable, as it will give you a good result for your examination. Okay, do well, practice well and remember well. Thank you.